Mr. Sheehy. Mr. Sheehy, aye.
Soccer team lost too. Well, the Cubs swept the Cardinals and secured.
Mr. Lee, aye. Miss Lotkin, no. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. McConnell, aye. Ms. Murkowski, aye.
Are you still?
Mr. Risch, aye. Mr. Whitehouse, no. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer, no. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Cruz, aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 54, the nays are 45, and the motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, Department of State, Michael G. Waltz of Florida to be representative of the United States of America to the sessions of the General Assembly of the United Nations.
President.
Senator from Oregon.
Mr. President, in the wake of violent and senseless murders of multiple lawmakers and political advocates, I rise to seek passage of legislation that would provide a real measure of protection to all Americans for their privacy and security. Before I do, I also want to point out that I'm just back from the so-called war-ravaged hellhole of Portland, Oregon, my hometown, and Somehow I made it out unscathed. I'll have more to say, but I want to make clear that my hometown of Portland is safe, it's vibrant, and Portlanders do not want federal troops and do not need federal troops. Now, with respect to privacy as it stands today, data brokers have amassed vast amounts of Americans' personal information, which they are willing to sell to anyone with a credit card. Would-be murderers can often find the home address and other personal information about their targets within a few search results on Google. Indeed, the assassin who murdered Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman and shot State Senator John Hoffman repeatedly used People Search, websites run by data brokers to learn the home addresses of the victims. I also recognize that members of Congress receive untold numbers of violent and harassing threats as a result of our job. And I want to credit the bipartisan effort in the Senate Commerce Committee to provide privacy protections for members of Congress. I do not intend to stand in the way of their legislation. The bill I offer today takes the privacy protections against data brokers in the Commerce Committee bill and extends them to all Americans. Protecting everyone is the most effective way to protect U.S. military and intelligence personnel, including undercover officers. There have been numerous press reports over the past few years revealing how data brokers are selling sensitive location data collected from U.S. personnel working at military bases and other sensitive facilities, and are willing to actually sell this data to foreign buyers. Members of Congress should not receive special treatment. Our constituents deserve protections from violence, stalking, and other criminal threats. For that reason, Mr. President, as if in legislative session, and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs be discharged from further consideration of S. 2850 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object. I thank my friend, the senator from Oregon, for his passion for privacy. And he has had a passion for protecting privacy his entire tenure in the Senate, as have I. And his passion is genuine. And I believe we have an obligation, a bipartisan obligation, to do more to protect the privacy of Americans, especially kids, but to protect the privacy of Americans across the board. We also are well aware we live in a time where violence is on the rise. There is enormous division, there is enormous anger and hatred. The entire world was shocked just a couple of weeks ago at the assassination of Charlie Kirk by a deranged gunman who inscribed his political agenda on the shell casings as he murdered a husband and father of two. Just last week, I was in Dallas, where another deranged gunman opened fire at an ICE facility, killing two. Again, that deranged gunman inscribed his political agenda on the shell casings. I wish we did not face this partisan anger. I wish we did not face these threats of violence. A previous Congress passed legislation protecting the personal information of federal judges because, sadly, too many federal judges and their families have been targeted for violence. That legislation was bipartisan, it passed into law, and it has had some modicum of success protecting federal judges and their families. In this instance, Senator Klobuchar, a Democrat, and myself have teamed up together to extend the same protections of privacy that federal judges have to members of Congress and to their staffs. We are all blessed to represent our states, and yet we know that there are threats of violence that come with this job. Collectively, the 100 of us in this chamber have faced thousands and thousands of death threats and threats of violence. Our staff have been victims of violence over and over again. And so This legislation is bipartisan legislation to enhance the safety and security of members of Congress and their staffs. Now, Senator Wyden has suggested broadening that to all Americans. I admire that sentiment and agree with that sentiment. There are challenges, however, with the language he has drafted. The language he has drafted, as presently written, could, among other things, prevent law enforcement and parents from knowing where convicted sexual predators are living. It could have the effect of gutting Megan's laws that have been adopted all across this country. So what I have offered to Senator Wyden is to work with him in good faith. I chair the Commerce Committee. I've already offered to convene a hearing examining how we can expand privacy protections more broadly, but do so in a way that doesn't disrupt law enforcement, doesn't disrupt legitimate interests such as knowing where sexual predators are living and making sure they're not living near young children, near daycares, near schools. Because the legislation as submitted by the senator from Oregon has not yet worked through those issues, I reiterate my offer to work in a bipartisan manner to find an expansion of the legislation that is under consideration that would work effectively, but in the meantime, I object.
Objection is heard. Senator from
Mr.
Oregon.
President, the senator from Texas has offered to do a hearing on my proposal, and I do appreciate that. I simply believe it's unfortunate when the Senate will pass privacy protections for ourselves, but not for all Americans. And only shady data brokers, would-be murderers and stalkers, as well as foreign adversaries buying data on U.S. government officials are actually going to benefit from blocking this bill. However, understanding that my colleague has made his arguments believing that my legislation goes too far, I also have a narrower piece of legislation tailored specifically to 3 groups of people who face elevated risks of violence, doxing, and stalking, similar to members of Congress and our staff. This bill is also modeled on the bipartisan Commerce Committee bill and protects members of Congress and staff. Additionally, it protects state and local officials, including state judges, who were left out of an earlier judicial privacy bill. The threat to state and local officials has not gone away. Just this week, a gunman fired a bullet directly into the home of a state senator in Illinois. This legislation protects survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence who deserve the strongest possible safeguards against being stalked or harmed. Mr. President, even if a member objects to protecting all Americans, surely the people doing our jobs in state capitals across the country and those who've suffered assault and violence deserve the same protection as you and I. Therefore, as if in legislative session and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs be discharged from further consideration of S. 2851 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration, that this bill be considered read a 3rd time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Senator from Texas.
reserving the right to object for the same reasons I articulated a minute ago. I am quite sympathetic to the concerns raised by the senator from Oregon, and he is right. There are threats against state and local officials. Those threats are serious, and they deserve to be dealt with seriously. In my view, violence is never acceptable, and that is whether I agree with you politically or I disagree with you politically. We should debate civilly, with respect, with decency, and violence should never be the answer. And so, just as I did with his previous amendment, I extend my offer in the hearing we convene to consider the issue of state and local officials, to consider how best to expand the protection. I'm interested in expanding the protection to as wide a universe as is feasible, as is practicable, but that answer is not yet worked out. State and local officials is a universe that comprises tens of thousands, if not more people than that. And we should have hearings and consider the effect before passing legislation that, if the bill got expanded, would engender an objection to this bill and kill the entire bill altogether. Because I don't want this body to do nothing and to fail to take a reasonable, common sense step to protect the security of members of Congress and their staffs, and because I very much want to pass Senator Klobuchar's legislation, which I might note, Senator Klobuchar is a Democrat, I'm a Republican. This is bipartisan legislation. Because this amendment at that time, I believe, would imperil the Senate doing anything right now, I object.
I'm going to close with this.
Senator from Oregon.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oregon.
Thank you. I want to tell my colleague from Texas I look forward to the hearings on legislation that will ensure that all Americans have these protections, because as you and I have talked about, I think it's critically important there not be a double standard in America. I thank my colleague for the offer of the hearings. Mr. President, I yield.
Senator from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, along with Senator Gary Peters, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate observe a moment of silence in this chamber to honor the 4 people and many more wounded yesterday in Grand Blanc Township.
Without objection.
Mr. President, today I rise on behalf of the community of Grand Blanc, a community in unspeakable pain, grief, and anger. I stand on the floor of the U.S. Senate as Michigan's junior senator, along with our senior senator, Gary Peters, to represent and honor what has gone on in our community. At 10:30 yesterday morning, a man drove a car into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Grand Blanc Township. The gunman set fire to the building and started shooting. At this time, 4 are deceased, more are injured and at the hospital. And in this small community, just 15 minutes from my own community, we are shocked to the core. In addition to mourning the dead, we pray for the injured. We pray for the community that will be living with the effects of this for months and years to come. And we thank the professionals who are taking care of those in shock today. Everywhere you go in Michigan, whether I was picking up a cup of coffee or picking up my dry cleaning, Michiganders are very raw. I think the most important thing first is to thank our first responders, but also use them as an example. The first officer was on the scene 30 seconds after the 911 call, and it took law enforcement 8 minutes to neutralize the shooter. 8 minutes. They did a masterful job addressing an incredibly complex act of violence, and their efforts are what are keeping people afloat. I want to give special recognition to 2 officers, one from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, the other a Grand Blanc Township police officer who happened to be in the area close by and risked their lives to protect the innocent. They did not wait. They ran towards the danger without hesitation, and they are heroes today. I visited Grand Blanc Township this morning. We made a point to go, both Democratic and Republican elected leaders, local, state, and federal. What I saw in the community is confusion and deep pain that something like this could happen in this small place. It's a community where fender benders are much more common than any kind of violent crime. And there's a feeling of pain that such a senseless and useless act of violence happened in our community. I think it's important to learn that lesson from law enforcement, from everyone I talked to, whether it was local law enforcement, our state folks, our federal folks. They all said we just all joined in. We didn't think. They put their heads down and they started protecting people. That is the example I hope we can all learn as we try to understand this moment in our country's history. We have a problem in this country. We have an epidemic in this country, and we have to acknowledge that. The only way we get better is by acknowledging we have a problem. We have a problem with mental health, And we have a problem that people think violence is a legitimate option in voicing disagreement in our system. Whether it was the death of Charlie Kirk, state legislators in Minnesota, people worshiping in Grand Blanc, those who attacked the President of the United States. It's normal to look for an ideology and a reason why they would perpetrate these kinds of attempts or these kinds of attacks. But I think more than anything, what I ask Michiganders and ask Americans to do is look not for the specific reason why, but understand that what is happening in our country, we are signaling that we are unwell. We are unwell. Whether it's in Nevada or Michigan, people are unwell. And we have to understand that it is our responsibility to address that. Now, in Michigan, we unfortunately have had 5 mass shootings in the past 4 years. Oxford High School, Michigan State University, the Splash Pad in Rochester Hills, another church in Wayne, Michigan, and now Grand Blanc Township is added to this sick fraternity of communities that have to endure this kind of violence. And I would dare say that myself, I experienced today, this is the 4th time I have personally dealt with one of these mass shootings, and I can see that it desensitizes you after all these times. You get used to it in a way that I just can't reconcile. It was important for us to come together, Democrats and Republicans, to put out the message that please take a breath, don't watch everything social media is putting forward. Learn from our law enforcement officials to be serious and judicious, and let us all be leaders in our own lives. Either you are working every day in your community to make things better, or you are working to split people apart. Now, this targeted violence was meant to terrorize us. It's meant to make us scared in our houses of worship, where people were just trying to pray on a Sunday morning. It is meant to terrorize us in our high schools, in our colleges, in our places of political discourse, on our university campuses. But what it does by making us afraid, it is infringing on our freedom. If people don't feel that they can go to their sanctuaries, the place where they and their children are supposed to be safe, that is infringing on our freedom. So I would say we must acknowledge as Americans that we have an illness. And the symptom is this extreme violence that is being perpetrated on our most innocent civilians. So I hope today, after a long month of violence across the country, that Democrats and Republicans, especially in this body, can rise above the petty political games and come together to get to work on this epidemic. It is our responsibility as leaders. It is our responsibility as the people look to us to lead. And I just encourage every American to rise above the anger and vitriol of this moment and instead focus on our communities and what we need to come together and heal. And with that, Mr. President, I yield to my senior senator, Gary Peters.
Mr. President.
Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, I, along with my Senate colleague from Michigan, Lisa Slotkin, are heartbroken and appalled to stand here today as we grieve yet another tragedy in our home state of Michigan. On Sunday, Grand Blanc Township experienced unimaginable violence when a gunman drove his car into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, fired gunshots at the members of the congregation, and then started a massive fire using gasoline that destroyed most of the church building. This was shocking, it was horrific, and it was a violent attack on a quiet and peaceful community. There are now families whose loved ones will never return their call, never hug them back, and never sit by their side as they practice their faith. I'm devastated to share the ages of these individuals that ranged from just 6 years old to 78 years old. I simply can't imagine the agony that their families are now experiencing. There are also 8 other victims who remain in critical condition in the hospital, with their families waiting anxiously by their side. My thoughts are with them as we hope and pray for their safe recovery. This was the kind of horror that you don't want to believe is even possible in our world, let alone in our own community. But unfortunately, this is not the first time that I've stood at this podium after senseless acts of violence devastated parents, siblings, children, friends, and neighbors in my state. That's why a part of me feels this terrible sadness today for the pain and loss that was inflicted upon Grand Blanc Township and the greater community. But I also feel just immense outrage, because there are no words to describe the pain and the devastation and confusion you experience at these moments. Pain for the senseless loss of life, devastation for the sense of fear that no matter how hard we work to heal, this despicable act has shattered this quiet community. And our utter confusion as to how someone could have the capacity to inflict this kind of evil. We know that our nation is plagued by an epidemic of gun violence. More than 100 Americans will die from gun violence each and every day in our country. We also know that there has been a rise in violent threats and deadly attacks targeting churches, synagogues, mosques, and other houses of worship in communities all across our country. We cannot allow these patterns of violence to continue. We cannot simply accept these attacks like it's another normal day. It is not. And despite what people may tell us, there's far more that unites us than divides us. Now more than ever, we need to come together and hold each other up. And once we have grieved, we must work together to find solutions that will prevent this kind of tragedy from devastating more communities. It's certainly past time to enact sensible gun reform and ensure that every American can practice their faith without fear for their lives. It is certainly past time to take the temperature down on our politics, a growing sickness that has undoubtedly contributed to the rise of polarization and hate-fueled violent attacks across our country. The bottom line is that the time to act is now. There is simply no other option. I want to once again share my deepest condolences for the families and loved ones of the victims of this absolutely horrific attack. My heart breaks for the entire community and everyone that has been impacted by this catastrophic event. I also want to thank the law enforcement and emergency personnel who responded immediately to this harrowing scene. In fact, 2 law enforcement officers engaged the shooter in less than a minute. And as a result, there is no question that countless lives were saved. Their profound bravery and heroism can never be forgotten, as well as a courageous community members who acted quickly to shield women, children, and the elderly from gunfire. And finally, I want to thank the numerous local, state, and federal agencies who have stepped in to support the victims and their loved ones and ensure a thorough investigation is carried out. Mr. President, Michiganders are tough. Michiganders are resilient. But most importantly, they're kind. And on Sunday, that kindness showed through as we saw so many people race to help in the aftermath of this appalling attack. As we remember the victims, and as we remember their loved ones and the community members who are still grieving, I hope those actions not only provide some form of comfort, but also show that heroism and kindness in the face of unspeakable tragedy is truly who we are as Americans.
Mr. President,
Senator from Vermont.
well, first of all, I want to express my sadness at the loss of lives in Michigan, and I want to thank my colleagues, Senator Peters and Senator Slotkin. You speak for every single one of us, and our hearts are broken. Regrettably, our hearts are broken too many times with this endless violence. But thank you so much, and you spoke for every single member of the Senate, Republican and Democrat. I think you spoke for America. Thank you, my colleagues. Mr. President, we're on the verge of a shutdown. And the question is why? And there's a couple of reasons. Because my view, we should never have a shutdown. And it's an indication of a breakdown in the constitutional process and the failure of the executive and the legislative branch to do their jobs. And as with any kind of, quote, shutdown, the conversation focuses on who's to blame. I don't particularly want to talk about who's to blame because I know who will suffer. And the people who will suffer are the people that you represent in Nebraska. They're the people I represent in Vermont. But I do think it's important to give some history of how this happened and what's at stake. And I say that hoping that at the end of the day, which will be tomorrow, we do not have a shutdown. We do not turn the lights off on government. We've had brinksmanship before, but before we've had situations where as we approach the midnight hour, the policy differences that were vast between Republicans and Democrats were being discussed by Democrats and Republicans. And that discussion was often at the behest and insistence of the executive, playing a proper role to get us to talk and resolve those differences. This time it's different. We had an executive who said that his party should not even speak to Republicans or to Democrats, not even speak to Democrats. So, I'll just ask the common sense question a Vermonter would ask. Peter, if you disagree with somebody and you won't talk to them, how will you resolve the disagreement? And that's what's happened. The second thing, and I want to say this to my Republican colleagues, we have an executive who pays no respect to the role that the legislative branch of this government plays in the affairs of this country. We passed a budget with Republican and Democratic support. And we had an executive who said he didn't care what it is we passed. He was going to do what he wanted under the aggressive, caustic leadership of Russell Vought, the head of Office of Management and Budget. And what Republicans and Democrats in this body agreed to spend, the executive refused to spend, froze the funding, whether it was foreign aid or health care. He could decide. That is a total and complete violation of the constitutional separation of powers, and to the extent that this body, Congress, puts its head in the sand and disregards the assault on our authority by the executive, we have relinquished our authority. More importantly, we have relinquished our duty. We have relinquished our duty, Mr. President, to the people we represent to stand up for the constitutional separation of powers and to bear the responsibility that we have to make decisions about taxing and spending. There's another reason why we can't just kick the can down the road. There is in this country an affordability crisis. People can't afford homes, and they definitely cannot afford health care. And folks are terrified at the likelihood of a person they love in their family getting sick if they don't have insurance. And what is about to happen if we don't act before this shutdown is that folks who are getting their health care on the Affordable Care Act, who are paying a significant portion of their income for that health care, but can only afford it because of the subsidies, not because they want to have subsidies, but because the health care system is so expensive. Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. Those folks in your state and mine are going to lose their health care. And that is a reason we cannot condone a resolution that does not include protecting people's health care across this country. All those folks who are dependent on the Affordable Care Act, for them to be able to have security that if their partner, if their child needs health care, they'll have access to health care. That's the urgency of this. That's what makes it different. We have an executive who has told the Congress, and the Republicans in Congress, don't talk to the Democrats. Disgraceful. But more than that, we have a situation where the people all of us represent will lose their health care if we don't resolve that now, right now, because they are starting to hear about the premium increases that will make it completely unaffordable for them to have access to health care. You know, when we get into the political situation, my Republican colleagues ask me, Peter, why would you want to have a shutdown? Which I don't want, by the way. But you know what? It's a fair question. But you know, there's a fair question I can ask of my Republican colleagues. Why do you want to have a resolution where the people we all represent are going to lose their health care? That's a fair question for us to ask you. And my belief is that there is no answer for that question because it is within our power right now, today, tonight, to make certain that folks who are on the Affordable Care Act will continue to have access to health care. It's up to us to solve that problem. And let me just talk specifically about that and what it means to folks. If we don't act, Mr. President, in Florida, 30% increase. Kentucky, 32% increase. Louisiana, 32% increase. Alabama, 34% increase. West Virginia, 35% increase. Texas, 39%. Tennessee, 41%. South Carolina, 50%. And you know, we have wicked high health care premiums in Vermont, and we may have the worst situation. Let me give you an example, and I know you, Mr. President, as a former governor, are totally sensitive to this. I know you are. A family where you've got two folks working, they're making a little over $100,000, they can get the Obamacare health care for about $7,500. Their premium is going to increase by $23,000. That's not their fault. They have no control over that. They can't shop around. But what they know is they have a child, maybe a child with disabilities. And what they know is they love that child. They know they love their family. And they know as responsible adults, they want to make sure if those kids, if their partner needs health care, they'll have it. And if we fail to act, we're saying, you're on your own. It's complicated. It's political. That is so unacceptable. And that's what we're talking about. The blame game is, why are you in favor of a shutdown? I am not in favor of a shutdown. I think the more profound question for each of us, Republican, Democrat, Independent, is it within your power to continue health care for the Americans that we represent? And the answer to that, we all know, is a yes. It is within our power. Now, we may have to stand up to an executive who doesn't particularly care about that. But we do. We do. And if we do, we must act. So that's what's at stake here, Mr. President. Will we step back from the politics and the blame game and the shutdown, showdown activities that are becoming ever more prominent here, and just ask ourselves, as United States senators, all of us whom represent people who are working class, some are wealthy, some are disabled, all kinds of people, and we care about them. But can we really say we care about them if we'll let them lose their health care? My answer to that is no. So I'm ready to do whatever it takes to continue access to health care. And the people who want health care, it's about the love they have for the people in their lives. It's not about getting some political advantage with the outcome of this debate. Mr. President, I yield back.
Mr. President.
Senator from Hawaii.
Thank you, Mr. President. Donald Trump is powerful, but he is not all powerful. It is true that he's trying to consolidate power in illegal and dangerous ways, but it is also true that he's often failing to do that because of public opinion, because of markets, because of institutions, and because of the law itself. And I want to give you a couple of recent examples. 2 weeks ago, shortly after Trump and FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr threatened to punish ABC if it didn't suspend Jimmy Kimmel's show, the network announced that it was taking the show off the air indefinitely. And so, at first, the public coercion seemed to work. Brendan Carr had said point blank, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. And the network caved. But a swift and searing backlash quickly followed. Consumers revolted. People began canceling their subscriptions. Disney's market cap fell by close to $6.5 billion in a matter of days. Artists, advertisers, and employers spoke out. Even Republicans in the Senate denounced the move. My Senate colleague Ted Cruz called it, quote, dangerous as hell. I think it is unbelievably dangerous for government to put itself in the position of saying we're going to decide what speech we like and what speech we don't, and we're going to threaten to take you off the air if we don't like what you're saying, end quote. Criticizing your own party's administration is hard. I understand that. But this is not about whether you're left or right or whether you thought Jimmy Kimmel's comment was insensitive or not. It is about the basic question of, are we allowed to speak freely in a country without fear that the government is going to come after us? Because if not, that's not the America that any of us recognize. Here's another example. Last week, Trump installed a loyalist with no experience as a prosecutor as the interim U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. And within days, the office indicted former FBI Director James Comey on charges without much evidence at all. And the case is so absurd that they couldn't even get a single career prosecutor to take it on. And so instead, the newly installed interim U.S. attorney had to sign and present the indictment herself in a highly unusual move. One of the charges was rejected by the grand jury almost immediately. Now, why does that matter? It is without a doubt a dark day for the country when the president of the United States uses the Justice Department to prosecute political opponents. But legal experts widely expect this case to fail before it even gets to trial. And that, too, will be a reminder that while this president is powerful, he is not all-powerful. This isn't a free-for-all. He doesn't get to just do whatever he wants. Which brings me to this debate about government funding. Democrats are out of power, but we are not powerless. And our price is not that high. We have been asking Republicans for over a month to sit down and negotiate. I've been here 13 and a half years. We have never passed an appropriations bill without a negotiation. But Trump literally told his party, quote, "Don't even bother dealing with them." And so it took until today, on the eve of a shutdown, for a meeting, and the House is out of town. The House adjourned until after the funding deadline expires. They were going to come back on October 1st, which is already 24 hours too late. Now they're thinking October 7th. If you're serious about a deal, if you're serious about keeping the government open, why are you not in the United States Capitol? Russ Vought in July, the OMB director, said, you know, the appropriations process should be less bipartisan. The person in charge of the federal government and the executive branch is pretty explicit. He says the appropriations process should not involve Democrats at all. The only way to keep the government open is for both parties to negotiate a bipartisan agreement. If the Republicans want to listen to Donald Trump and say, don't even bother dealing with the Democrats, then there's a very old adage and an iron law in politics, which is if you don't ask for the vote, you do not get the vote. We are ready to work together to keep this government open, and I want everybody to understand what we're fighting for. What we're fighting for. Tens of millions of Americans are getting letters in the mail, and they don't know they're on the Affordable Care Act exchange. What the hell is that anyway? They just sign up for health care on a website, right? You don't know if you're on Obamacare or some hybrid thing or employer or this or that. You just get a letter from your insurer, and they say, if you want to re-enroll in your health care plan, here's how much it'll be. And it's usually like a small increase year over year to cover inflation. And so now they're going to get a letter that literally says, your subsidies are gone and your new price is X. The average increase is going to be hundreds of dollars per person per month. Add to that we are hearing in some states, and maybe as a result of some jawboning with the administration, they are waiting to send those letters. They are waiting to send those letters. Why? Because they're hoping we're going to resolve this ACA tax credit thing. And they don't want to eat, politically speaking, the fact that a bunch of people, tens of millions of people, Democrats, Republicans, independents, non-voters, but zero non-citizens, you are not eligible to be on the exchange if you are a non-citizen, are going to get a letter saying, you know, it's going to be $3,000 or $4,000 more per year. Go talk to a regular person. Some of us know regular people who are on that exchange and know, I just can't do it. $300 more per month. And by the way, if you get that letter in December and your first payment is due on January 1, you are extra screwed. And so I understand that the White House understands how big of a political liability this is, because people are really going to get hurt. And now it's a question of sort of people wanting to not behave as though they're giving in. But let's be adults here. There is a crisis that is about to happen to tens of millions of Americans, and we have an opportunity to fix it, and there is bipartisan desire to fix it. And Leader Thune and Speaker Johnson's view is, nah, we'll deal with that later. And Donald Trump was saying, why don't we deal with that next year? By next year, all of the rates are locked in, and people will be paying $300 or $400 or $500 more per person per month. We can fix this, and we should. I yield the floor.
I recognize the senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I come to the floor today because we have a choice here. And the Democratic leaders in both the Senate and the House just went to the White House. They had a long meeting. I'm glad that meeting happened. I hope something will come out of it. But the president has repeatedly said, well, we don't need Democratic votes. Well, we can do this on our own. And the problem is, the more he says that, the more the American people are saying, what about me? What about me, says the farmer whose soybean market has dried up that I met with last week. What about me, says the mom coming out of the grocery store and looking at her bill. Or the student thinking, I can't afford this electricity bill. Or everyone that's starting to look at these healthcare numbers, looking at the insurance premiums, looking at the fact that this administration has not stood up for them on healthcare. So if they would open their eyes right now and see what's going on out there, or maybe go to those 13 rural counties that I just visited in Minnesota, maybe they would see that this is a moment where people are expecting the president and congressional Republicans to work with us on these unfolding crises. The tariffs may be decided in the courts, or the Congress can decide enough is enough. But this healthcare crisis, that's on this body to do something right now. The president has sadly made his position clear. He would rather shut down the government than work with congressional Democrats to address this skyrocketing healthcare cost crisis. So our colleagues, many of whom I work with every day, they can decide. Are they going to rubber stamp what he does? Are they going to try to work with us? So one of the things one of the farmers said to me last week at one of my meetings is he said, between my entire market drying up, Minnesota, 60% of our soybeans are exported to other countries. Of course, China hasn't purchased a bushel since this president came in. And the cost of fertilizer going up because of the tariffs on potash out of Canada, and even then, although they were reduced, it's still a major driver. Between the issues with visas and not having enough workers, he described it as he looked at the healthcare policy and what's happening there, since about 28% of our farmers are on the Affordable Care Act because they're individual business owners. He said it's a perfect storm of ugly. And I think that's a good way to describe it. So what do you do when there's a storm, a perfect storm of ugly coming at you? Do you go out there with an umbrella and say, well, maybe we can look at this in a month or two? You don't have that luxury. The American people don't have that luxury. This is not a December thing. This is not a January thing. This is a now thing. So I hope our colleagues will see it as the opportunity that it is, and that is to finally do something to help the people that are facing this. NBC recently reported on one family that currently pays $278 a month for health insurance thanks to the health care tax credit. If Republicans in Congress and the president let this expire, this family's premiums could soar to $1,800 a month, increase of $1,500 a month. Estimate is nationally it'll be 75% increase in premiums. In rural, it'll be double. I was actually surprised in our rural hospitals. Of course, they're concerned about the Medicaid cuts, that $500 billion in Medicare cuts that is coming at them because of the fact that the debt was increased so much in that bill with the tax cuts for the wealthy that it triggered an automatic $500 billion in Medicare costs. All of that worries them. But maybe I just hadn't thought it through. The Affordable Care Act premium increases without any tax credits really concerns them. Why? Because so many of their people that are going into their hospitals in rural areas are either on Medicaid or they're on their, what we call in Minnesota, MNsure, their policy through the Affordable Care Act. Those people won't be able to afford double, no way, because they're already in that perfect storm of ugly. So then they're not gonna have insurance, and they're gonna show up in their emergency rooms in these mid-sized towns with no insurance. So they said this could make a major, major difference for them. Our legislation, it would have kept the lights on. Our bill, it got more votes than the Republican bill. Like to point that out. A whole bunch of people didn't even show up for the vote that we just had a week ago. And our proposal that did something about health care to restore people's health care actually got more votes than the Republican proposal. So we want people to work with us and prevent millions of Americans from losing their health care. This is our opportunity to show why we came here to begin with, and that is to stand up for our constituents. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Wisconsin.
For the past 6 or so months, I've been crisscrossing the state of Wisconsin, listening to families, small business owners, parents, caregivers, doctors, nurses, and neighbors about what good, affordable health care means to them. And the overwhelming consensus, as you might expect, was that having health care you can rely on and afford means everything. I know this exact feeling. When I was just 9 years old, I had a very serious childhood illness, similar to spinal meningitis. That wasn't the exact diagnosis, but I was in the hospital for 3 months. And even though I was able to make a full recovery, my family was then not able to find any health insurance to cover me, not at any price, because I had been labeled as a child with a pre-existing health condition. You see, back then, insurance companies were under no obligation to cover people who had been sick or were sick. So people with pre-existing health conditions like diabetes or cancer diagnosis so often went uninsured. That kind of experience, being hospitalized for months and then not being able to get health insurance, it's not an experience that one forgets. So when we have these debates about healthcare policy, I know that it's not just a high-minded conceptual idea. It is real. The consequences are real. And the people behind the stories are real. And over the past few months, I've been able to hear those real stories. I heard stories from families who were sometimes unable to put into words what it would mean if their Medicaid were stripped away. I heard from Evan in Madison, Wisconsin. Evan is on Medicaid. We call it Badger Care in the state of Wisconsin. Evan has undergone 2 brain surgeries and subsequent radiation over the past 10 years to treat brain tumors. Thankfully, he has Medicaid to help cover this care. But his ability to stay healthy means that he needs medication. And he said, as he wrote me, without Medicaid, I won't be able to afford my medication that literally gives me the ability to go out and be a part of my community. I also heard from Ashley from De Pere, Wisconsin. She told me how Medicaid is essential for her 15-year-old daughter with disabilities. Medicaid has allowed her to modify her home so her daughter can safely get around, and also allowed the family to get a wheelchair-accessible van so her daughter can get to school and get to the doctor and just be a kid and experience the world. These are the Americans who are now living in fear that their Medicaid is on track to be terminated because my Republican colleagues jammed through a partisan bill that cuts Medicaid to the bone and will kick more than 10 million Americans off their health care. And as always, I would be remiss if I did not say that that was all in service to giving huge tax breaks to big profitable corporations and the ultra-wealthy. This is the damage that I'm hearing about from people I work for. And sadly, the stories from folks who are worried if their health care is on the line don't end up there. 24 million Americans get their health care from the Affordable Care Act. And they're waiting right now for that dreaded letter in the mail, letting them know that their premium costs are about to skyrocket. For the 22 million who receive enhanced premium tax credits, their costs will go up on average by 75%. 4 million of these Americans are going to get that letter and realize that they cannot afford health care at all anymore. This, of course, is because my Republican colleagues refused to pass our bill to extend the enhanced premium tax credits and make them permanent, which allow millions of Americans to get affordable health care through the ACA. I heard from some of those families and small business owners last week. They are just dreading what they're about to find out and what the future holds for them. Take Kim, who owns a bakery in the Fox Valley. Last week, she laid out how if Republicans refuse to extend these tax breaks, she's not only worried about how she will be able to afford her health care, but also that increased costs on the exchange will mean that employees may quit working for her to go work for a big company that offers insurance. And of course, she's worried that her customers will inevitably be left with less in their pockets to come by and patronize her store. I also heard from Keith in Marathon County, who runs his own insurance business. He knows this issue inside out. And Keith laid out some staggering figures for me of what he is staring down. If Republicans don't join me in extending these premium tax credits and making them permanent, Keith's premiums will go from less than $740 per month to more than $2,300 per month just to get insurance for his family. That is a staggering increase. It is no exaggeration to say that the American people are staring down a healthcare crisis. We have a healthcare system in crisis. And I want to be clear that it is 100% manufactured by my Republican colleagues. But you know what? This is still avoidable. It's still avoidable. I am hearing my constituents sounding this alarm, and so I'm here to do the same. I got the memo that they don't want to have Medicaid gutted. They don't want to have their Affordable Care Act tax credits taken away. And they don't want their costs to skyrocket. And the people I work for have been crystal clear about what they expect and demand of Congress. Work together to lower costs and give them the opportunity for their hard work to let them save and to let them get ahead. So that's my position. We need to lower the cost of health care, not take it away from families. I simply refuse to just go along to get along, because the people I represent are truly struggling, and the solution is right in front of us. And that brings us to today. The path to keep the government open and stop health care costs from rising for millions is on the table. The whole idea of a shutdown is totally avoidable. If Republicans refuse to see what is right in front of them, then a shutdown is on them. And Wisconsinites will know exactly who to thank when they get that dreaded letter and their health care costs skyrocket, or they see it simply stripped away. Mr. President, I yield.
Mr. President.
Recognize the senator from Connecticut.
Mr. President, the House of Representatives is not coming back into session reportedly until next week. The government is shutting down tomorrow night, and the Republican House of Representatives isn't here. And they aren't coming back until the government has been shut down, reportedly for days. That tells you all you need to know about who is responsible for a potential shutdown of the government. Republicans care so little about funding the government that they aren't even showing up. President Trump doesn't care either. He boycotted even meeting with Democrats until 24 hours before the shutdown was to begin. He was watching golf or posting on social media, basically anything except trying to negotiate, to do the job of government. I wish Republicans were trying to keep the government open instead of trying to shut it down. But what I really want is for Republicans to open their eyes and see what is happening at an increasing pace to our democracy. What I want, what I think is necessary at this moment, is for any budget that we write to put the health of our democracy first. In fact, as I've watched the events of the past few weeks play out, with political enemies being systematically hunted by this administration, I think that we all have a moral obligation to only support a budget that at the very least puts the brakes on the president's lawlessness. Right now, our democracy is in grave peril. And there's no better example of this than the events that played out last week over the indictment of former FBI Director James Comey. The president has made it clear that he wants to put his political enemies in jail as retribution for the charges brought against him. He does not care about whether there are grounds for these charges. He just wants charges. And so he instructed Eric Siebert, the U.S. attorney in Virginia, a Republican, to bring charges against James Comey. But Siebert refused for a simple reason. There was no evidence that James Comey had done anything illegal. So Trump fired Siebert. He appointed his personal lawyer, who has never set foot in a courtroom, as the new U.S. attorney, simply because he knew she would follow orders. Every career prosecutor in the office recommended she refuse to bring the charges, again, because there were no charges to be brought. But she did it anyways, as instructed. Not a single other lawyer in the office would sign the indictment, virtually unprecedented in a case like this. Trump cheered the indictment, and then he warned that there would be more charges brought against others that had vocally opposed his policies. And that's not all that happened in the last 2 weeks. Trump ordered the FCC to issue threats to TV stations that did not remove one of his primary late-night critics, Jimmy Kimmel, from the airwaves. He announced new military deployments to additional cities. He began a process to harass and arrest leaders of prominent political groups that oppose his presidency, threatening at least one funder of groups that oppose his policies, George Soros, with arrest simply for supporting opposition to Trump. Much of this, though not all of it, has happened in the wake of the brutal, horrific murder of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. His assassination was abhorrent. And it was and still is a moment for all of us to consider what we can do to stamp out political violence and violence of all kinds. But his murder does not justify the dizzying campaign of political repression that has been carried out often in his name since. To exploit his murder, to crush dissent, or to censor speech is unacceptable. And this brings me back to the debate over the expiring budget. I join with my colleagues in wanting this new budget to, at the very least, postpone the healthcare insurance increases that are coming for millions of Americans that are going to ruin people's lives in this country. 75% increases for people who are going to make this awful decision about whether they should continue to pay their premiums, whether they should put food on the table for their kids, or whether they should risk going without insurance. I think that's a pretty reasonable ask. Just don't increase costs on families when it comes to health care at a time when the cost of everything else is going up because of President Trump's insane economic policies. But let me ask you this as well. Why would we not also simply say that any budget we pass should stop the worst of the lawlessness? Stop the deployments to our cities. Stop the witch hunt of Comey and Soros and Senator Schiff. Stop using the FCC to censor speech. Stop unconstitutionally ignoring the budget and spending only money that the president wants to spend. To me, this is simple. We should not willingly pay the bills for the most serious assault on political freedom since the Civil War, an assault that may collapse American democracy as we know it. Now, I know my Republican friends think that this is hyperbole, that our fear for democracy is just fear-mongering, just politics. I swear it is not. My Republican colleagues know why Comey and Senator Schiff and Soros are being targeted. They know that the president just picked the people that give him the hardest time and told his folks to come up with charges. My Republican colleagues know the impact that this has on people who want to politically and peacefully oppose the president, but now won't do that because they fear for their freedom. Republicans know this. They should not defend it. Republicans know that it's wrong to sit down and agree to a budget and then cheer the president when he refuses to spend the money in blue states or on the priorities that got Democrats to sit down at the table to begin with. Republicans know that that's not fair play. They shouldn't defend it. And Republicans know that using the FCC to crack down on speech that the president doesn't agree with is wrong. They know, as Senator Cruz pointed out, that that's a slippery slope that we may never get off. I want to find agreement with the Republicans on stopping these premiums from going up. I do. I think that's really important for people in this country. And I think it's okay to admit that this is an odd arrangement that we have in American government today, where the minority party in the Senate, so long as it has 40 members, is kind of in a coalition government with the majority party because the budget can't pass without bipartisan agreement. But the majority party has an obligation to honor and fight for a basic set of protections for our democracy. And when it doesn't, it really stops being a good faith negotiating partner. How do Republicans expect us to vote for a budget that funds a government that is lawlessly pursuing Democrats, that is arresting and harassing our members and our allies, that's deploying the army and masked officers to our cities? We are at a moment of decision for this country. Right now, Republicans aren't even trying to keep the government open. They're not even here. They're rooting for a shutdown. But if we're going to keep the government open, why can't we all agree that it should only be a government that respects our democracy, that is not corrupt, that doesn't treat people and places that oppose President Trump as enemies deserving of indictment or military deployment? That also seems like a pretty minimalist ask. So it's decision time. Is this Senate going to fund the destruction of our democracy, or are we going to do what is necessary to stand up for basic American values? I yield the floor.
I recognize the other senator from Connecticut.
Thank you. Well, I'm honored to follow my colleague from Connecticut and to build on some of the arguments that he has made so well. We're here because our democracy is in crisis. It's not some potential catastrophe on the horizon that's distant or hypothetical. It's real. It's now because of the lawlessness and recklessness of this administration. And it is the result of a contempt for the law, for legal norms, that seemingly is boundless. We've seen it in the Jimmy Kimmel episode where the FCC chair said in mobster-like language they can do it the hard way or the easy way. You have a nice restaurant there, it would be a shame if anything happened to it. I prosecuted mob cases. That's the kind of language we see from organized crime. And it was shown in the indictment of James Comey, a document signed only by the United States Attorney, not by any career official. And after only 14 members of the 23 people on that grand jury voted to do it on 2 of the counts, rejecting a third, all of this kind of procedure is so highly extraordinary. As a former prosecutor, it would be an embarrassment. But this administration is beyond shame when it comes to lawlessness. And we've seen it in immigration, in healthcare, in education, in the VA, where countless people have been illegally fired, some of them hired back. And that is why we are insisting that there be a guarantee that the president will follow the law when we pass a budget. Not a hypothetical danger that he will disobey it. In fact, he's ordered rescissions, impoundments, clawbacks. If we pass a law, we have to be sure the president will follow it. Otherwise, there really isn't any point to this branch of government. And so I say to my Republican colleagues, as a matter of your self-respect, as a matter of protecting this institution, you should agree with us that there must be a guarantee that the rule of law will prevail. And I say to my constituents in Connecticut, we're going to stand up for you to save your health care, because you can't wait to get sick. You don't choose to get sick on November 22nd or January 3rd when it's convenient for Donald Trump and the Republican majority. You need to know when there's open enrollment on November 1 whether or not your insurance will be affordable for you. You need to know whether those subsidies will make it affordable for you, because otherwise you won't be able to buy insurance through the ACA. In fact, 90% of all people in Connecticut who buy insurance through the ACA marketplace receive some kind of subsidy, and their insurance premiums will skyrocket by 75% if that subsidy is ended. They need to know now, when open enrollment starts, whether those subsidies will be there for them. And it will affect insurance premiums for everyone if we fail to extend those subsidies as part of this continuing resolution now. Why? Because healthier people who see their insurance premiums rise by 20%, right now they're projected to rise at least 18% for everyone, because that's the cost of this failure to extend the subsidies. The healthier people are going to say, I'm not bothering, I won't need it. The sicker people may try to buy it, and the insurance companies will have to cover illnesses, more of them with fewer premiums, and they will have to charge more to everyone to cover it. So this failure to do the right thing has impacts for everyone who seeks health care. And tries to buy insurance to pay for it. The Republican proposal is an abject failure when it comes to ensuring that the American people don't pay more for health care. And I heard from constituents just over this past weekend as I went to the Durham Fair, as I went to the Mum Parade in Bristol, as I went to Norwalk and Stamford and Milford, all around the state, people asking me, what will happen to my health insurance? What will happen to my health care? Nothing is more important than health. And we are saving health care for the American people by insisting that this extension of government funding include a reversal of the cruel and stupid, big, blatant betrayal. It's not a big, beautiful bill. The big, blatant betrayal that failed to extend those health care subsidies and insist that whatever the bill that's passed be obeyed by the president. The ACA premium tax credits have protected millions of Americans from those higher health care costs, and they've reduced the number of Americans without health insurance coverage. They've provided robust choices for consumers and provided stability for health care providers, especially in rural areas. And I've heard from those providers who are as worried as their patients about what will happen to this program. What the Republicans are doing is cruel. It's unnecessary. There is a straightforward, simple solution. It should not be a partisan issue. Republicans know we have to extend those subsidies. Why not now? That's the mystery to the American people. And there will be no credit for a shutdown. The American people know that we're not seeking it. We hope to avoid it. It will be on Republicans who have refused to come to the table. House Republicans have refused even to come to town, come back to go into session. And they are having discussions, reportedly, about whether they can have fundraisers during the shutdown if there is one. So we need some wiser heads and stronger consciences to prevail. And I am hopeful there is still time to reach that kind of agreement. I choose to stand with working families, and I urge my Republicans to do the same. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
I recognize the Minority Whip.
Mr. President, millions of Americans better check their mailbox the next week or two. There's some bad news. Letters are being sent by health insurance companies that are trying to give some kind of a warning to these families about what's going to happen to their health insurance premiums because of the big, beautiful Trump budget bill. One family in Illinois tells the story. Leanne Safford and her husband, Lori. Right now, Leanne and Lori pay $278 a month for health insurance under the Affordable Care Act. But starting January 1st, their monthly premiums, now get this, jump from $278 a month to $1,800 a month, a 550% increase. $1,500 more coming out of the paychecks of Lori and Leanne. Why is this happening? Because we have a system, or had a system, that provided subsidies and tax credits to working families so that they could afford their health insurance. However, in the big, beautiful budget bill of Donald Trump, passed with every Republican voting for it, every Democrat voting against it, these subsidies and credits started to disappear. Thanks to President Biden and a Democratic Congress, those credits were there for families that they could count on them. Because of the Republican decision with President Trump, to give tax breaks to the wealthiest people in America, they cut back on the premium assistance that was available to the Safford family. These credits had opened the door to millions of working and middle-class Americans like Leanne and Lori to be able to afford quality health insurance. Now they've got to make a choice. This is a lot of money. $1,500 a month? Millions of Americans will decide. Are we going to cut back on essentials like food and dental, or switch to a higher deductible plan, more money out of pocket if anybody gets sick? Leanne said, quote, "Right now we're making a decision based on being relatively healthy. But as we all know, with health, it could change in a day." That's the same bind that millions of Americans are going to face because of the Republican decision to give a tax break to the wealthiest people in America. According to the Congressional Budget Office, more than 4 million American families are going to lose their health insurance if congressional Republicans allow these subsidies to expire. And that's what's going to happen if we don't change, including more than 100,000 in my state of Illinois. It doesn't have to be this way. We can extend these tax credits and still fund government. I remember a time in this chamber when Democrats and Republicans came together on a bipartisan basis when real family challenges existed and tried to solve the problem. We just don't have that spirit here anymore. They've decided on the Republican side we're going to give tax breaks to these wealthy people, even at the expense of working families. And we have a president hell-bent on abusing his power and a Republican Congress that refuse to disagree with him. Earlier this year, President Trump and Republicans in Congress signed into law this big, beautiful bill. Cuts nearly $1 trillion from programs like Medicaid. What is Medicaid important for? Limited income families and retired individuals. This big, beautiful Republican budget bill cuts nearly $1 trillion from Medicaid and $300 billion from the food stamp program, now known as SNAP. As a result of their bill, the Republican bill, more than 10 million Americans will lose their health coverage. Ever had a child who was sick and no health insurance? I have. You'll never forget it as long as you live. This is separate from 4 million others who stand to lose their health coverage if the Republicans continue to block our efforts with the ACA tax credit. It seems Republicans in Congress are fine adding more than $3 trillion to the national debt over the next 10 years to pay for those tax cuts, but they draw the line at extending health care to millions of hardworking Americans. The math is clear. Republicans don't have the votes to force this extreme agenda. Governing requires input from both sides. We're taking a stand for this family and millions more just like them. When they get the jolt of the news of where their health insurance premium is going to go, where do they turn? I hope they can turn to Congress and members of the Senate who actually care for working families. If we refuse to do the job, Leanne and Lori are going to pay the price. Let's be clear. Democrats stand ready to negotiate on a fair, bipartisan basis. The only reason we're staring at this shutdown is because Republicans have refused to come to the table. There was a meeting in the White House today. Don't let it be the last one. Let's come together and fix this health care problem for America's working families. The president on Fox News said last week, "Don't even bother dealing with the Democrats." Well, the president's wrong. We're in this together. We need to solve this problem together. If the government shuts down, it will be because of President Trump walking away from a major challenge facing working families. I yield the floor.
Recognize the senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, one of the things I've had the most trouble understanding in the time that I've been in the Senate has been Republicans' bizarre fascination with attacking healthcare systems, with taking healthcare coverage away from Americans. It came to a boil in the Beautiful for Billionaires bill, which cut about $1 trillion out of Medicaid, and then in a hidden fashion through sequester, cut about $500 $1 trillion out of Medicare, and then attacked the Affordable Care Act, which so many Americans rely on to be able to afford their health insurance. I represent Rhode Island. Rhode Island is probably going to lose up to $5 billion in federal Medicaid funding. The Medicare cuts would be probably about half of that. And the Affordable Care Act is going to hit about 40,000 Rhode Islanders who will see their insurance premiums explode. And that is going to happen soon. This is a health care crisis that Republicans have created. And we'd like to try to protect the American public in all of this. These are not going to be small increases in people's bills. We're talking about an 85% increase in already expensive health insurance premiums, as much as $1,200 a year for a middle-class family. Let me give you just an example of what this looks like in real life. A constituent named Carla. Carla is 60 years old. She's retired. She was a mental health counselor, which is noble work, but doesn't make you rich. She gets $60,000 in annual income, mostly from her 401k. She doesn't yet qualify for Medicare, so she got insurance from Rhode Island State Health Insurance Marketplace. She has a family history of heart disease. She has hypertension. When the tax credits under the Affordable Care Act expire at the end of the year, Carla's monthly premium will go from $427 a month to $904 a month. That's more than double. That's a $477 per month increase to the expenses of a woman whose total income is only $60,000 a year. We ought to be able to solve this. All we're asking for is serious negotiations to address the Republican health care crisis. Or, I guess, if they refuse, the Republican government shutdown. It's very much up to Republicans where we go from here. All the reports are that the meeting between the president and congressional leaders went badly. No progress was made at all. It's really up to the Republicans. Will they really choose to shut down the United States government just to indulge their bizarre fascination with taking health care away from Americans? Aren't we better than that? Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Recognize the senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, we are just a day away from a government shutdown because President Trump and Republicans would rather shut down the government than work with us to keep health care premiums from spiking for American families. We're watching the same pattern repeat itself again in Washington. Partisan politics and dysfunction hurting hard-working families. This fight, Mr. President, is about health care. It's about what happens to families in Arizona if tax credits that reduce their health care premiums expire. It's about costs going up for people who are already feeling squeezed by inflation and Trump's tariffs, driving up the prices of everything, from groceries to back-to-school supplies. And it's not complicated. If these tax credits expire, working families in my state will see their monthly premiums spike when they go up to sign up for a new plan in just a few weeks. I've heard from Arizonans who are now saving hundreds of dollars every month because of these credits. Ending them would be a gut punch. For some, it would mean losing their coverage altogether. So it's pretty simple. We should extend them, and that's what we're proposing. And let's not forget who holds the cards. Donald Trump and my Republican colleagues. They're the ones saying no, not just to Democrats, not just to us, but to families in Arizona and across the country. But instead of working with us to lower costs and avoid a shutdown, Donald Trump has refused to even sit down and talk about it for weeks until just today, barely 24 hours before the deadline. He'd rather watch the country inch closer to a shutdown than to try to figure out solutions. And Mr. President, it's going to be everyday Americans who pay the price, your constituents and mine. In Arizona, more than 379,000 people have reduced premiums through these tax credits. It lowers their premium by, on average, about $475 every single month. So if those tax credits are allowed to expire, that means their health care premiums for next year go up as much as 55%. That's hundreds of dollars every single month. And that blows a huge hole in the family budget. It means canceled family trips. It means not being able to sign your kid up to a sports league. It means taking on more shifts just to cover this added cost. And for a lot of folks, what this means, it means they will not be able to afford health insurance at all. The estimate is that more than 109,000 people in Arizona alone would be unable to afford coverage. In the richest country in the history of the world, there is no reason why somebody who is working full-time shouldn't be able to afford basic health insurance. No one should be one accident or one unexpected illness away from financial ruin. No one should be unable to take their kid to a doctor when they get sick. But here we are because of Donald Trump and Republicans. This would hurt even harder in rural Arizona and small towns, places like Cochise, Apache, Navajo, and Santa Cruz counties, where there are fewer large employers who offer health benefits, but these are counties with higher poverty rates. It will hurt families across Arizona who finally got access to care. And now they're being told that it may disappear. It doesn't have to be this way. Now, there's still time to extend the premium tax credits and protect families from higher costs while keeping the federal government open and serving Americans. Mr. President, we can do this. We've just got to be willing to sit down and work to figure it out. I know I am. Thank you, and I yield the floor.
Recognize the senator from Wisconsin.
I'll note we're running a little bit behind schedule, so I'll ask consent to be able to speak up to 25 minutes before taking the vote.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'll ask you, I'll ask everybody in the chamber, everybody listening to me on C-SPAN. Aren't you getting sick and tired of these government shutdown showdowns? The drama, the turmoil, the partisan bickering, the holding American people and our economy hostage for demands for billions and billions of dollars of more spending that we can't afford? I know I am. This madness doesn't have to continue. We can begin ending this madness tonight by voting on a very simple piece of legislation. Eliminate Shutdowns Act. Again, it's very simple. All it does is, if we don't pass an appropriation bill for all of government or any department, we don't shut those departments down. We don't shut all of government down. We do literally what the state of Wisconsin has done since the 1950s. We just keep spending at last year's levels. I mean, how more common sense can you get? Now, we accomplish that by enacting 2-week rolling continuing appropriations to fund, again, all of government or any department that doesn't have an appropriation passed for it on a rolling basis. Now, I asked the chamber, who could be opposed to something so simple that, again, prevents all this turmoil, all this drama, all this partisan bickering? Well, my guess is Democrats will oppose it. My guess also is some of our appropriators will oppose it. I've heard some of the rationale. I don't think it really holds water. What one point made is the problem with continuing resolutions. They fund programs that should be reduced or canceled, and they prevent important new programs from being started. Well, again, that will create the incentive. I agree with that, by the way. I don't like CRs either. That will create the incentive under these automatic, rolling, 14-day continuing appropriations to pass appropriation bills. It doesn't in any way, shape, or form diminish or detract from the authority of appropriators or the Appropriation Committee. I've also heard that appropriators, they want the pressure of government shutdowns to allow them to pass appropriation bills. I guess I somewhat understand their point, but I'd like to point out that that pressure certainly hasn't worked. Mr. President, I got here in the year 2011. I don't think anybody can dispute the fact that at least since that point in time, and probably before that, the appropriation process is broken. It's dysfunctional. In 15 years, what we should have done in Congress is pass 180 appropriation bills during those 15 years. 12 a year times 15, 180 bills. You know how many we actually passed? 6. 6 bills. 1 for fiscal year 2017, 5 for fiscal year 2019. 6 bills. That's 3.3% success rate, or stated a better way, that's a 96.7% failure rate of the appropriation process. During that 15 years, we've had 3 shutdowns. We passed 55 continuing resolutions, 55. And people are going to oppose an automatic rolling continuing appropriation? By the way, this year, the continuing resolution that we did pass, it took us 6 months. 6 months of dysfunction before we finally passed the appropriation for this year, which of course is going to end in a day and a half. Now, what the shutdown pressure did produce is it produced the pressure to mortgage our children's future further. It produced the pressure to pass multiple 1,000-page omnibus spending bills. We've increased or suspended the debt ceiling 12 times in those 15 years since I've been here. Our debt has gone from $14 trillion to over $37 trillion. Clearly, this is a broken process. Spending is completely out of control. Now, I don't think it's going to surprise anybody to find out I brought a couple charts to basically make my point. I'd like to talk about a few facts, a few figures. This chamber is generally not really interested in talking about like figures. I guess my accounting background, I like to do so. Let me give you a little history lesson. This dates back, these are 4-year average deficits going back to the year 2001. And you'll see in the first two terms of President Bush's administration, average deficits were $200 billion, then $300 billion. So average over his 8 years, $250 billion worth of deficits. Again, those were unacceptably high back then. That's when $100 billion or two actually was real money. People were concerned about it. President Obama came into office with the Great Recession, and his advisor, Rahm Emanuel, said never let a good crisis go to waste, and they didn't. So in his first term, President Obama's average deficit was $1.27 trillion. That sparked the Tea Party movement. I'm part of that. And the Tea Party came, we actually made a difference. We did dig our heels in on that out-of-control deficit spending. And so for President Obama's second term, deficits averaged $550 billion. Again, $550 billion, that's a lot of money, except in Washington, D.C. President Trump came into office, divided government, and he had to do deals to get spending bills passed. So his deficit increased to $810 billion for the first 3 years. Then COVID hit. We went on a massive bipartisan uniparty spending spree, $3.1 trillion a year deficit. $3.1 trillion. We went from $4.4 trillion in spending to $6.5 and never looked back. Now, responsible leaders would have recognized that was an aberration. We can't keep spending once the pandemic's passed. You know, back in World War II, we had responsible leaders. We started World War II spending 11.7% of GDP. During World War II, that increased to 41% for the war effort. But responsible leadership brought that spending back down to 11.4% of GDP after the war in 1948. That's not what the Biden administration did. They kept spending at pandemic levels. We averaged during Biden administration deficits of $1.9 trillion. We'll have a deficit this year about $2 trillion. And the very sad fact is over the next 10 years, based on CBO's most recent figures, the total 10-year deficit is going to equal about $26.4 trillion. That's $2.6 trillion per year. It starts out about $2 trillion, ramps up to over $3 trillion by the year 2035. Now, most of our party leadership says the problem here is we have a spending problem. We don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. Let me just prove that point. This is one of my favorite charts that literally shows no matter how much we try and punish success with the top marginal tax rate, we've had back in 1959 a top marginal tax rate of 91%. How much would you work if the federal government took 91 cents of every dollar you made? I wouldn't work very hard personally. It's been as low as 28%. I would say for a brief period of time, we were 72% free under Ronald Reagan. Now we're at 37% top marginal tax rate. But again, you can see the ups and downs. What's noteworthy about this chart, no matter how much we try and punish success, over time, It's been very consistent. We were able to extract 17.1% of the American economy in federal revenue. We've had a high of 20%, but that was after the dot-com bubble, and that quickly came back down to 17.1% average. It's time we recognize that reality. If we're going to ever balance our budget, what we need to do is get spending under control. We have a spending problem, which I think this chart clearly demonstrates. Back in 2000, we spent $1.8 trillion. 1.8 trillion. That was 17.7% of GDP. That was the year that we had 20% of revenue. We had a surplus for 4 years. We had a surplus for 4 years, and we frittered that all away. We finally broke the 2 trillion mark in the year 2002 after 9/11. All of a sudden, we're on a war footing. We had to spend more to defend this nation. And again, we've never looked back. The absolute high point, other than World War II, the high point in spending was during President Obama after the Great Recession, 24.4% of GDP. By the way, that year, because of the recession, revenue went down to 14.4%. That's what produced those massive deficits of $1.2, $1.3 trillion. 2014, again, the result of the Tea Party, we pretty well held spending flat about $3.5 trillion for about 5 or 6 years. And so spending as a percent of GDP, which is a relevant figure, dropped down to 20.2. This year, we're going to be spending about over $7 trillion, greater than 23% of our economy. And we're going to collect about 17.1%. We've got in excess of a 6% structural deficit. It's clearly unsustainable. Now, I hear a lot of talk about, well, Ron, it's all mandatory spending, which is a problem. Okay, all these government shutdowns is all about 25% of federal spending, the discretionary accounts. We have 75% of our spending in mandatory. But you have to understand, it's not all Social Security, Medicare, or even Medicaid. Over the decades, I'm researching to see exactly how this happened. We've transferred what I would consider, and what probably formerly was, discretionary spending into other mandatory. So this year, we'll spend about $1 trillion in other mandatory spending. And what this chart shows is the variance between 2019 spending plussed up for population inflation, leaving Social Security, Medicare, and interest alone spent at 2025 levels. If we were to do that, instead of spending $7 trillion this year, we'd be spending about 6.5. Other mandatory, again, not Social Security, Medicare, or even Medicaid, we're spending $239 billion more than inflation and population adjusted 2019 spending. I don't think we were spending too little in 2019. Non-defense discretionary, up about $145 billion over fully inflated 2019 levels. So that's not the problem. Now, just one other fact I want to dispute, particularly for defense hawks in my party, because I hear it a lot. Well, the good news is we've got parity between defense spending and domestic spending. I don't know what figures they're looking at, but if you only consider non-defense discretionary, yeah, I mean, the increase from Bill Clinton is pretty close to 1-to-1, but that was before 9/11, before we're on a war footing. Under Obama, under Trump, is 1.4-to-1 to 1.64-to-1. But again, you can't ignore the other mandatory, that other $1 trillion nowadays. If you factor in non-defense discretionary and other mandatory, we've increased spending on domestic programs 2.5 times to 1. The defense, from Obama's spending, the increase is 3.5 times to 1. Under Trump, it's 3.65. So we don't have parity. I'm sorry, defense hawks. You have had your lights out. You've lost that battle. We're not even close to parity. Whatever you think you're getting in defense, they're getting 3.5 times that in domestic spending. And again, we can't afford it. So again, those are just some basic facts, some basic figures that explain our current fiscal situation. But let me go back to where I started. Here we are again, another shutdown showdown. Democrats' opening bid, by the way, was, okay, we'll give you a 4-week CR, 4 weeks. And all we're asking is another $1.5 trillion in spending. So we'll end the turmoil, we'll quit playing games with people's lives for 4 weeks, as long as you agree to roll back everything you passed in the one big beautiful bill and increase spending $1.5 trillion. Is that a serious starting negotiation point? I don't think so. What I'm asking all my colleagues is, please imagine a world in which these ridiculous shutdowns are no more than a ridiculous relic of the past, where we're not wasting our time and effort and energy and angst over this partisan bickering. Again, I have to remind you, the Eliminate Shutdowns Act does not diminish the authority of the Appropriations Committee. If we do these rolling continuing appropriations, now the appropriators can get together, they can find areas of agreement like we did in this chamber on Veterans Affairs and military construction and that minibus. Where there's areas of disagreement will take some time, find the compromises. As I said, I agree with the point that the problem with CRs is they fund programs that should be reduced or canceled, and they prevent important new programs from being started. There again, there's another incentive to do appropriations, and now you have the time to do it. We won't be wasting our time and effort and energy and angst on these charades. These are charades. Now, I can't predict exactly what would happen if we pass the Eliminate Shutdowns Act. Nobody can. I can't predict we will never have another shutdown ever in the federal government. I'm okay with that. Again, I don't like CRs. I don't like our current spending level. I'm willing to concede much higher spending levels than I think we can afford to eliminate government shutdowns for all time. So I can predict that. But here's something else I think could happen. If we're not wasting our time on this partisan bickering over shutdowns, there have been so many discussions about bipartisan appropriation and budget reform. Things like 2-year appropriation cycles, where instead of 12 bills, which obviously we can't pass, how about doing 6? Make it manageable. The year you don't appropriate for an account, you're doing oversight, and just reverse the cycle. I mean, I'd even consider 3-year appropriation bills, 4 a year. That could impinge on future Congresses. So I understand that, again, there are complications to all these things, but think positively about what ending shutdowns could do for this body, for this government, for people's lives. Passing the Eliminate Shutdowns Act, eliminating shutdowns for all time, would be a signature achievement of this Congress. Think of that. We together on a bipartisan basis can say we're the group. After the horrible assassination of Charlie Kirk, recognize this is the moment to come together as a nation, as a Senate, as a Congress. Do the right thing for the American people, end government shutdowns. That would be a signature achievement of this Congress, and I am hoping and praying that we do that. But let me be honest. Voting no on this bill, voting no is basically voting yes for continuing the chaos and for continuing to play partisan games with people's lives and our economy. That's what a no vote is. Voting yes would help cement this as a lasting legacy for this Congress. So again, I urge all of my colleagues, please put this partisanship aside. Recognize the value of eliminating shutdowns and vote yes on this very simple, very common sense bill that I think, quite honestly, the American people want to see passed. Now, with just a couple more minutes, I do, because I sat through the chamber, I listened to all the arguments about the Obamacare subsidies. The temporary COVID enhanced Obamacare subsidies. Nobody's talking about doing away with Obamacare subsidies. But it first should be pointed out, the reason health insurance is so expensive on the individual market is because of the faulty design of Obamacare. We had high-risk pools to take care of people with pre-existing conditions. Need a couple tweaks to cover everybody. But that wasn't good enough for Democrats because they wanted a single-payer system, so they threw out and outlawed high-risk pools, and in its place forced people on the individual insurance market to pick up the full cost of covering people with pre-existing conditions. That caused insurance rates on the individual market to skyrocket. That's why insurance prices continue to skyrocket on the individual market in particular. Now, what Democrats did during whole COVID is they basically removed any participation into the Obamacare exchanges from many millions of people that qualified. The result of that is massive fraud. You have unscrupulous agents and brokers who are signing people up, just using their name and their birth date, for health insurance that these people don't even know they're signed up for. So they don't make claims. Something like 12 million people on the Obamacare exchanges out of 20.5 million had no claims. Well, that's typical. Maybe 10 to 15% of people on insurance don't make claims because they're healthy. But 12 million out of 20.5, estimates are at least 6 million don't even know they have the policy. So we are literally pouring tens of billions of dollars per year into insurance companies for policies for people that they don't even know they have them and they don't use them, while we're paying commission to those dishonest brokers. That's a massive level of fraud that apparently Democrats have no problem perpetuating. Republicans have a problem with that. We want to lower premiums by doing common sense reform and repairing the damage done by Obamacare. But again, I think what I heard on the floor needed some response. So, Mr. President, that's my response to that. And I'll just end, again, encouraging all my colleagues. The American people don't like these shutdowns. They want them ended. We have a very simple bill, not partisan. It really offers no advantage to anybody, which is perfect. It just keeps the government open and gives appropriators time to do appropriating, appropriate those departments, and end all the chaos, end all the turmoil, end all the playing games with people's lives. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The questions on the nomination?
So, yeas and nays?
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt-Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Ms. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins. Oh, Blackburn. Thank you.
Ernst, aye.
Thank you. Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins. Thank you. Mr. Coons. Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Curtis. Mr. James. Ms. Duckworth. Mr. Durbin. Ms. Ernst. Mr. Fetterman. Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Gallego. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Haggerty. Thank you. Ms. Hassan. Mr. Hawley. Thanks. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Marino.
Aye.
Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, thank you, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Blackburn, Capito, Cassidy, Cornyn, Curtis, Ernst, Fisher, Graham, Hyde-Smith, Johnson, Kennedy, Marino, and Risch. Senators voting in the negative: Gillibrand, Klobuchar, Murkowski, and Padilla. Mr. Paul, no. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Mrs. Moody, aye. Mr. Peters, no. Mr. Tuberville, aye. Ms. Rosen, no. Mr. Husted, aye. Ms. Cortez Masto, no. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. Lujan, no. Mr. Crapo, aye. Ms. Warren, no. Mr. Reed, no. Ms. Baldwin, no. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Mr. Schatz, no. Mr. Young, Aye. Mr. Gallego, no. Ms. Blunt Rochester, no. Mr. Barrasso, aye. Ms. Duckworth, no. Ms. Collins, aye. Mr. Wyden, no. Mr. Kane, no. Mr. Heinrich, no. Mr. Daines, aye. Mr. Ossoff, no. Mr. Whitehouse, no. Mr. Lankford, aye. Mr. Sheehy, aye. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Grassley, aye. Mr. King, no. Mr. Cotton, aye. Mr. Sullivan, aye. Mr. Marshall, aye. Mr. Durbin, no. Mrs. Murray, no. Mr. Welch, no. Ms. Lummis, aye. Mr. Schiff, no. Ms. Hassan, no. Mr. Bennett, no. Mr. Schumer, no. Ms. Smith, no. Ms. Cantwell, no. Mr. Justice, aye. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mr. Coons, no. Ms. Hirono, no. Ms. Alsobrooks, no. Mr. Warnock, no. Mr. Sanders? No. Mr. Moran? Aye. Mr. Rounds, aye. Mr. Hoven? Aye. Mr. Kelly? Aye. Mr. Scott of South Carolina? Aye. Mr. Hawley? Aye. Mr. Kramer? Aye. Mr. Murphy? No. Mr. Merkley? No. Mr. Markey? No. Mr. Blumenthal? No. Mr. Kim? No. Mr. Warner? No. Mr. Fetterman, aye. Mr. Banks, aye. Mr. Budd, Aye. Mr. McCormick, aye. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Mr. Lee, aye. Mr. Booker, no. Mrs. Britt, aye. Mr. Ricketts, aye. Mr. Schmidt, aye.
I didn't see Biden as enthusiastic. You won, you
Ms. Slotkin, no. Mr. Cruz, aye. Mr. Mullen, aye. Mr. Hickenlooper, no. Mr. Haggerty, aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 54 and the nays are 45, and the nomination is agreed to.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the motion to reconsider be considered made, laid upon the table, and the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action.
Without objection. Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent there be 2 minutes of debate equally divided prior to this cloture vote.
Without objection.
Mr. President,
Senator from Washington.
this bill has a very nice sounding name, but that's about the only good thing you can say about it. Because what it really does is hand over Congress's power of the purse to Donald Trump and Russ Vought. If this bill passes, it won't just be Democrats' voice in funding that gets squashed. Republicans will be cutting themselves out of funding decisions because the bill extends government funding indefinitely so Donald Trump and Russ Vought never have to worry about Congress again. If this bill were to pass, Trump could quite literally refuse to sign any funding bill, even a bipartisan bill, unless it met all of his demands. And Congress would then have to override his veto with a two-thirds vote in both chambers if we ever wanted to get off the forever CR this bill would put in place. No way. There's a very simple way to avert a shutdown. It starts with Republicans working with Democrats to hammer out a solution. It's time to do that. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wisconsin.
So I'll ask all my colleagues, aren't you getting sick and tired of these shutdown showdowns? I am. I've been here 15 years. We should have passed 180 appropriation bills before the end of the fiscal year. We've passed 6. 3.3%. That's a 96.7% failure rate. I'm sorry, the appropriations process is broken. This bill does nothing to diminish the authority of the appropriators. What it does is it removes all the turmoil, all the disruption of people's lives. It takes away the partisan bickering, and it just, every 14-day rolling appropriation bills to keep any department open where we haven't passed an appropriation bill, giving appropriators time to find areas of agreement and work out compromises and disagreement. Let me be clear, a vote against Eliminate Shutdowns Act is a vote to continue the chaos and to continue the partisan game playing with people's lives. And by the way, this won't be the only time we'll vote on this. I will guarantee you that if we go into shutdown. So please do right by the American people. Vote for Eliminate the Shutdowns Act. We can do away with shutdowns for all time. A simple vote, yes, we'll do that. I yield.
Can you bring a glass? Under the previous order, the clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the motion to proceed to calendar number 161 as 2806, a bill to provide for automatic continuing appropriation signed by 17 senators.
Under the previous order, the mandatory quorum call under Rule 22 has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the motion to proceed to S-2806, a bill to provide for automatic continuing appropriations, shall be brought to a close? The ayes and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks. Got you. Ms. Baldwin. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you. Okay. Mr. Banks. Mr. Barrasso. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Kim. Mr. Bennett. Thank you. Great bow. King. Thank you.
I thought I had you. We had a good conversation.
Ben Holland,
No.
okay. I got you. Good to you. Thank you. Thank you. Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt-Rochester, Mr. Booker.
I could say that.
Mr. Bozeman.
Somebody emerges like some crypto.
Mrs. Britt. Mr. Budd. Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito. I did, thank you. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons. Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz.
Can you change me to a yes? Sorry. I thought it
Sure.
was the other one.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Mr. Curtis, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin. Ms. Ernst. Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand. I got you. Thank you. Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley. Thank you. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Hickenlooper. Mr. Rono, Mr. Hoven. Mr. Husted. Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane. Thank you. Oh, geez, that didn't go. Yeah. Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Marino, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski.
That's nice. You're a good man. Thank you.
Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen. I know it's freezing. Mr. Rounds. Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden. I did get you. Yes. Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative. Banks, Barrasso, Blackburn, Bozeman, Britt, Budd, Capito, Hornan, Cotton, Kramer, Crapo, Cruz, Curtis, Daines, Graham, Grassley, Hawley, Hoven, Husted, Johnson, Justice, Kennedy, Langford, Lummis, McCormick, Moody, Marino, Risch, Schmidt, Scott of Florida, Scott of South Carolina, Sheehy, Thune, and Tuberville. Mr. Lee? Aye. Senators voting in the negative. Also Brooks, Baldwin, Bennett, Blumenthal, Blunt Rochester, Cantwell, Cassidy, Collins, Cortez Masto, Duckworth, Durbin, Fetterman, Fisher, Gallego, Hassan, Hickenlooper, Hirono, Hyde-Smith, Kane, Kelly, Kim, King, Lujan, McConnell, Merkley, Moran, Mullen, Murphy, Murray, Padilla, Paul, Peters, Ricketts, Rosen, Sanders, Schatz, Schiff, Schumer, Shaheen, Smith, Van Hollen, Warner, Warnock, Warren, Welch, Whitehouse, Wicker, and Wyden. Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Rounds, no. Mr. Young, aye. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Coons, no. Mr. Sullivan, aye. Yes. Ms. Klobuchar, no. Mr. Reed, no. Mr. Haggerty, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mr. Ossoff, no. Ms. Slotkin, no. Ms. Murkowski, no. Mr. Heinrich, no. Mr. Booker, no. Yep. Ms. Ernst? Aye. Mr. Thune? Mr. Thune? No.
On this vote, the yeas are 37 and the nays are 61. 3/5 of the Senate duly chosen and sworn not having voted in the alternative. The motion is not agreed to. The Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I enter a motion to reconsider.
The motion is entered.
Okay, got it. Mr. President,
The Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to legislative session and be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Mr. President,
The Minority Leader.
I move to proceed to calendar 167S2882.
The clerk will report the motion.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 167S2882, a bill making continuing appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2026, and for other purposes.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a closed debate on the motion to proceed to calendar 167S2882, a bill making continuing appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30, 2026, and for other purposes, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
He's going to say the motion's agreed to. I withdraw the motion to proceed.
The motion is withdrawn.
I move to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371.
The clerk will report the motion.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371, an act making continuing appropriations and extensions for fiscal year 2026 and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I send a cloture motion to the desk for the motion to proceed to calendar number 168, H.R. 5371.
The clerk will report.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a closed debate on the motion to proceed to calendar 168, H.R. 5317, an act making continuing appropriations and extensions for fiscal year 2026 and for other purposes, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I believe the clerk meant 371. Majority Leader.
President, I ask consent.
H.R. 5317.
President, I ask consent to read the nays be waived.
Without objection.
And I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 275.
The question is on the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to.
Mr. President, I send a
cloture. Clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, Department of Defense, Hung Kao of Virginia to be Undersecretary of the Navy.
Mr. President, I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Hung Cao of Virginia to be Undersecretary of the Navy, signed by 17 senators as follows.
Mr. President, I ask consent to read the names be waived.
Without objection.
And I move to proceed to legislative session.
The question is on the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion is agreed to.
Mr. President, I move to proceed to executive session and consider executive calendar number 2, SRES 412.
The question is on the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the resolutions. Majority Leader.
Executive calendar number 2, Senate Resolution 412, authorizing the en bloc consideration in executive session of certain nominations on the executive calendar.
Mr. President, I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on executive calendar number 2, SRES 412, and executive resolution authorizing the en bloc consideration in executive session of certain nominations on the executive calendar, signed by 17 senators as follows.
Mr. President, I ask consent that reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
And I ask unanimous consent that the Senate resume legislative session.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on the Judiciary be discharged from further consideration of S 1333 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
S 1333, a bill to amend Title 18 United States Code to modified provisions relating to kidnapping, sexual abuse, and illicit sexual conduct with respect to minors.
Without objection, the committee is discharged. The Senate will proceed.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs be discharged from further consideration of S 2144 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
S 2144, a bill to improve the safety and security of members of Congress, immediate family members of Congress, and congressional staff.
Without objection, the committee is discharged. The Senate will proceed to the measure.
Mr. President, I further ask that the Klobuchar substitute amendment, which is at the desk, be considered and agreed to. The bill is amended, be considered read a third time and passed. The motion to reconsider be considered made, laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on the Environment and Public Works be discharged from further consideration. The Senate now proceed to SRES 418.
Clerk will report.
SRES 418, expressing support for the designation of the week of September 20 through September 27, 2025 as National Estuaries Week.
Without objection, the committee is discharged and the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
And I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of SRES 420, which was submitted earlier today.
The clerk will report.
SRES 420, supporting the designation of September 19, 2025 as National Concussion Awareness Day.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Tuesday, September the 30th, that following the prayer and pledge, the journal proceedings be approved to date, the morning hour be deemed expired, the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, morning business be closed, and Senate resume consideration of calendar number 115, S2296. Finally, the Senate recess from 12:30 p.m. until 2:15 p.m. to allow for the weekly conference meetings.
Without objection.
Mr. President, if there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.